The wind in Musudafu was usually a stagnant thing, choked by the exhaust of morning traffic and the overarching shadow of towering skyscrapers. It carried the scent of ozone, fried food, and the sterile hum of a society that had long ago surrendered its natural rhythm to the miraculous and the artificial. But for as long as Izuku Midoriya could remember, he had felt a different wind. It was a phantom breeze, one that smelled of sea salt, crushed pine needles, and burning wood. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he could almost see red and gold leaves drifting across his vision, falling from trees that did not exist in this concrete jungle. He had always chalked it up to his overactive imagination, a byproduct of a mind desperate to escape the reality of being a quirkless boy in a world of gods and monsters. He sat at his desk in Aldera Junior High, his eyes fixed on the grain of the fake wood. The teacher at the front of the classroom was droning on about high school applications, a stack of papers waving in his hand. "Since you're all third years, it's time for you to think seriously about your futures," the teacher said, though his tone lacked any real gravity. "I'll pass out handouts for your future plans now, but you're all pretty much planning to go into the hero course, right?" The classroom erupted. Quirks flared to life, elongated limbs, minor localized explosions, sudden bursts of light and stone. It was a cacophony of genetic lotteries, a proud display of the power that dictated the hierarchy of their world. Izuku kept his head down, his hand instinctively resting on his Hero Analysis for the Future, Volume 13 notebook. He raised his hand, though only a fraction of an inch, a silent, timid gesture of his own impossible dream. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks," the teacher sighed, waving them down. "But using your powers in school is against the rules. Settle down, sensei. Don't lump me in with these losers." The voice belonged to Katsuki Bakugo. He leaned back in his chair, his feet propped up on his desk, an arrogant smirk plastered across his face. "I'm not gonna be stuck at the bottom with the rest of these rejects." The class instantly turned on him, shouting their indignation, but Bakugo merely laughed, small sparks popping in the palms of his hands. "You should all shut up like the extras you are." "Ah, Bakugo, you're aiming for UA High, aren't you?" the teacher noted, looking at his clipboard. A hushed awe fell over the room. UA was the pinnacle, the apex of Hero Academia. Its acceptance rate was notoriously abysmal, a meat grinder that only accepted the absolute best. "That's exactly why you guys are just extras," Bakugo crowed, leaping onto his desk. "I aced the mock test. I'm the only one at this school who could possibly get into UA. I'll surpass All Might and become the top hero. My name will be inscribed on the list of top earners." "Oh," the teacher interrupted, adjusting his glasses. "Midoriya wanted to go to UA too, right?" The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and agonizing. And then, the laughter began. It was a cruel, barking sound that echoed off the linoleum floors. "Deku? You're kidding, right? There's no way you can get into the hero course without a quirk." Izuku shot up from his chair, his face burning crimson. They got rid of that rule. There's no precedent, but that doesn't mean I can't try." Before he could finish his defense, a deafening crack echoed through the room. Bakugo's palms slammed onto Izuku's desk, an explosion detonating at point-blank range. The concussive force threw Izuku backward, his shoulder blades hitting the floor hard. "Listen up, Deku!" Bakugo snarled, towering over him, smoke rising from his palms. "You're even worse than these rejects. You're completely quirkless. How can you even stand in the same ring as me?" As Izuku looked up at Bakugo's furious, hateful eyes, a strange sensation washed over him. For a fraction of a second, the fear subsided, replaced by an icy, analytical detachment. His stance is wide, too heavily reliant on his upper body, a voice whispered in the back of Izuku's mind. A sweep to his leading leg would drop him. A strike to the throat would end him. Izuku blinked, horrified by his own sudden, violent thought. He shook his head, scrambling backward until his back hit the wall. "No, wait, Kaken. It's not like I'm trying to compete with you or anything. I swear!" He held up his hands defensively. "It's just been my dream since I was little. And I won't know unless I try." Bakugo scoffed, his eyes narrowing with disgust. The bell rang, signaling the end of the day, sparing Izuku from any further physical torment. As the class emptied out, Izuku remained on the floor for a moment, staring at his trembling hands. Where had that thought come from? A strike to the throat? He was Izuku Midoriya, a crybaby, a weakling. He didn't know the first thing about fighting, let alone crippling someone. He slowly picked himself up and gathered his things. He reached for his notebook, but a hand snatched it away first. Bakugo held the burnt, slightly singed notebook, flanked by two of his lackeys. We're not done talking, Deku. Kaken, give that back, Izuku pleaded, his voice small. Bakugo didn't even look at it. He clamped his hands together, his quirk activating. The explosion seared the cover of the notebook, turning the edges to ash. Izuku let out a choked cry as Bakugo nonchalantly tossed the ruined book out the open window. Most top first-string heroes have stories about them from their school days, Bakugo said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet cadence. I want the shine of being able to be called the only student to make it into UA from this mediocre city dump. I'm a perfectionist. He placed a smoking hand on Izuku's shoulder, the heat searing through the boy's uniform. So anyway, don't apply to UA, nerd. Bakugo turned and walked to the door, his lackeys chuckling behind him. Pausing at the threshold, Bakugo glanced back over his shoulder. If you want to be a hero that badly, there's a quick way to do it. Believe that you'll be born with a quirk in your next life, and take a swan dive off the roof. Izuku froze. The words hit him like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of his lungs. He stood there, completely paralyzed by the sheer cruelty of the statement. He wanted to scream. He wanted to fight back, but his body betrayed him, rooting him to the spot until the sound of Bakugo's footsteps faded down the hall. The walk home was a blur of gray concrete and heavy thoughts. Izuku had retrieved his notebook from the koi pond below the classroom window, dusting off the fish food and trying to smooth out the waterlogged, burned pages. Take a swan dive off the roof. Izuku trudged through a dark underpass, the shadows swallowing the afternoon sun. He kept his head down, his eyes fixed on his red sneakers. He was so tired. Tired of being the victim, tired of being the punchline, tired of the pity in his mother's eyes and the disgust in everyone else's. A medium-sized invisibility cloak. The voice was wet, guttural, and echoing from the darkness behind him. Izuku stopped. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. That phantom wind blew past him again, colder this time, carrying the metallic scent of blood. He turned around. Rising from the manhole cover behind him was a mountain of dark, viscous sludge. Two massive, bulbous eyes stared down at him, accompanied by a jagged maw of rotting teeth. It was a villain, a monster made of living liquid. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. He tried to run, to scream, but his legs wouldn't move. Don't worry, the sludge villain hissed, lunging forward like a tidal wave. I'm just going to take over your body. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. You'll feel much better soon. The sludge hit him with the force of a truck. Dark, foul-tasting liquid forced its way into Izuku's mouth and nose. It was like drowning in hot mud. The stench of sewage and rotting meat invaded his senses. He clawed at the sludge wrapping around his neck, his fingernails digging into the liquid, finding no purchase, no solid matter to fight against. You can't grab me, the villain laughed, the sound vibrating through the sludge directly into Izuku's skull. I'm fluid. Thanks for the help, kid. You're my hero. Izuku's lungs burned. His vision began to swim, the edges of the underpass darkening into a tunnel of black. He kicked his legs frantically, his hands tearing at his own throat in a desperate bid for oxygen. I'm dying, Izuku realized, the thought cutting through the panic with chilling clarity. I'm going to die here. Someone, please, help me. But as his oxygen supply dwindled to nothing, as his brain began to misfire and his consciousness started to slip away, the darkness did not take him. Instead, the darkness fractured. The cold concrete of the underpass vanished. The smell of sewage was replaced by the overwhelming scent of burning thatch, salt spray, and blood. The roar of the city traffic faded, replaced by the deafening thunder of war horns, the clash of steel, and the screams of dying men. Izuku was no longer in Musadefu. He was standing on a beach. The sand was stained crimson, littered with the bodies of men wearing elaborate, horned armor. Rain lashed at his face, mingling with the sweat and blood pouring from a gash on his forehead. Before him stood an army. Thousands of men in fur and heavy iron, wielding curved blades, shields, and terrifying tubes that spat fire and thunder. At their helms sat a massive man on an armored stallion. He wore robes of silk and steel, his face a calm, brutal mask of utter dominion. Khotan Khan. The name echoed in Izuku's mind, not as a thought, but as a memory. Izuku looked down at his own hands. They were no longer the soft, scarred hands of a 14-year-old boy. They were calloused, wrapped in leather, gripping the hilt of a katana that gleamed with ancestral perfection. The Sakai storm. He felt the weight of the armor on his shoulders, the deep, agonizing ache of a battle already lost. He saw a man tied to a post, his uncle, Lord Shimura, his face contorted in a mixture of pride and despair. Honor died on the beach. The words were spoken by his own lips, but they belonged to another. Izuku felt a lifetime of memories rushing into his dying brain like a dam breaking. He remembered the grueling training in the courtyard of Castle Kaneda. He remembered the sting of the bakken against his shins. He remembered the way of the bow, the way of the sword, the sacred tenets of the samurai. And then, he remembered the betrayal of those tenets. He remembered the shadows. He remembered the feeling of a kunai sliding into a Mongol's throat in the dead of night. He remembered the terror in the eyes of his enemies as they looked upon the ghost. He remembered the poison, the smoke, the absolute, pragmatic ruthlessness required to save his homeland when honor was nothing but a shackle. He was Izuku Midoriya, but he was also Jin Sakai. The two souls, separated by centuries, crashed into one another in the suffocating darkness of the sludge villain's grasp. The terrified, quirkless boy and the legendary, lethal ghost of Tsushima fused in the crucible of impending death. Under the overpass, Izuku Midoriya's eyes snapped open. The panicked, erratic flailing stopped. The tears welling in his eyes ceased. His emerald irises, usually wide with innocence and anxiety, narrowed into slits of cold, unyielding iron. The phantom wind howled through the tunnel, blowing a stray plastic bag past them. The sludge villain paused, feeling the sudden shift in the boy's resistance. Giving up already? Good. It makes it easier. Jin Sakai did not give up. Izuku's mind processed the battlefield in a microsecond. The enemy was fluid, lacking skeletal structure or pressure points. Conventional strikes were useless. However, the fluid was encasing him, meaning it possessed surface tension and viscosity. More importantly, the enemy had a physical anchor, the two massive eyes and the teeth. Izuku's hands, which had been pointlessly clawing at the sludge, dropped. With terrifying speed, his right hand shot toward his side, grabbing the thick canvas strap of his yellow school backpack that had fallen to the ground. He didn't try to pull the sludge off his face. Instead, he wrapped the canvas strap around his knuckles, creating an improvised garrote. He drove his fist forward, punching straight into the viscous mass, aiming not for the body, but for the large, vulnerable left eye. The villain shrieked as Izuku's fist, reinforced by the canvas, struck the gelatinous cornea. But Izuku didn't stop there. He twisted his wrist, wrapping the strap around the villain's optic stalk, using the leverage of the thick canvas to violently yank the eye downward and dig his thumb viciously into the tear duct. Ack! You little brat! The villain roared in agony, the sludge around Izuku's neck loosening as the monster recoiled from the localized, excruciating pain. It was a small opening, but for the ghost, a small opening was all that was required. Izuku drew in a sharp, ragged breath of air. He dropped his weight, shifting his center of gravity. He planted his left foot against the concrete wall of the underpass, entering a modified water stance, a form designed to flow around heavy, fluid strikes. With a powerful, twisting motion, he used the wall as a springboard, tearing himself out of the loosened sludge. He hit the ground in a roll, coming up in a crouch, gasping for air, but his eyes never left the enemy. He dropped his ruined backpack and raised his bare hands, his fingers curled slightly, perfectly balanced, waiting for the counterattack. The sludge villain writhed, a tendril clutching its injured eye. I'll kill you! I'll tear you apart! It bellowed, forming a massive, spiked whip of sludge and hurling it toward Izuku. Izuku didn't flinch. He saw the trajectory. It was wide, angry, undisciplined. He shifted his weight to dodge. Fear not, kid! A voice boomed through the underpass like a clap of thunder. A massive shadow eclipsed the mouth of the tunnel. Izuku barely had time to register the towering, muscular figure before the man moved with a speed that defied physics. Because I am here. The man pulled back an arm thicker than a tree trunk. The sheer air pressure gathering around the fist made the hairs on Izuku's arms stand up. Texas. Smash! The punch didn't even connect with the villain. The wind pressure alone was like a hurricane in a bottle. The concussive blast of air tore through the tunnel, instantly shattering the sludge villain into 1,000 helpless droplets, splattering him against the walls and ceiling. The wind caught Izuku, throwing him backward. He hit the ground, the lack of oxygen finally catching up to him, and the world faded to black. Wake up. A samurai does not sleep on the battlefield. The voice was stern, echoing in his mind. Lord Shimura, Izuku gasped, his eyes flying open. He instinctively reached for his side, his hand grasping for a katana that wasn't there. Hey! Hey! Are you alright? Izuku blinked against the harsh sunlight. A massive face with shadowed eyes and a blinding smile was leaning over him. He recognized the two antennae-like tufts of blonde hair instantly. All Might? Izuku choked out. Excellent! You're awake! All Might boomed, standing up to his full, imposing height. Sorry about that back there. I didn't mean to get you caught up in my justice. Usually, I pay more attention to bystanders, but this city's sewer system is a labyrinth. He let out a hearty, booming laugh. Izuku sat up slowly. He touched his throat. It was bruised and sore, but he was alive. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling slightly. But not from fear. It was an adrenaline crash. His body, weak and untrained, was rebelling against the sudden influx of warrior instincts it had just been forced to execute. I've got the villain safely contained, All Might announced, patting a 2-liter soda bottle in his pocket, filled with the writhing sludge. Now, I must be off. The media is waiting for me. Izuku watched as the number 1 hero turned to leave. A few hours ago, Izuku Midoriya would have scrambled, begged for an autograph, perhaps even clung to the man's leg just to ask one desperate question. But Izuku was no longer entirely Midoriya. He stood up. His posture was perfectly straight. His feet were shoulder-width apart, grounded and balanced. He looked at All Might, taking in the towering physique, the overwhelming presence. He recognized the man for what he was, a warlord. A benevolent one, perhaps, but a being of immense, godlike power who dictated the tides of their society, much like the Khans of old. Wait, Izuku said. His voice was not the squeaky, timid pitch he usually possessed. It was calm, leveled, and cut through the air with quiet authority. All Might paused, glancing back. Yes, my boy, I have a question. Izuku took a step forward. I do not possess a quirk. I have no supernatural strength, no ability to manipulate the elements. Society deems me powerless. All Might's smile faltered slightly, though it remained plastered on his face. He checked his watch, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. I'm sure you have a fine spirit, kid, but I really must. Can a man without a quirk stand on the battlefield and protect those who cannot protect themselves? Izuku asked, his emerald eyes boring into All Might's shadowed ones. Can someone quirkless be a hero? The wind blew across the rooftop they were standing on. Wait, rooftop. Izuku realized dimly that All Might must have jumped them up here before he woke up. All Might stood still. He looked at the boy. There was something unsettling about the teenager's gaze. It lacked the starry-eyed desperation All Might usually saw in his fans. Instead, those eyes looked old. They looked like the eyes of the veteran pro-heroes who had seen too many bodies. Suddenly, a plume of steam erupted from All Might's body. Izuku didn't flinch, nor did he step back. He simply watched, his hand resting casually by his side, ready to draw a weapon if this proved to be an illusion or a trick. When the steam cleared, the towering symbol of peace was gone. In his place stood a skeletal, emaciated man, spitting up a glob of blood. Izuku's expression remained entirely neutral. He analyzed the man. The sunken cheeks, the posture, the sickly pallor. A grievous wound to the respiratory system. Left side. Likely missing organs. He is operating on borrowed time, the ghost deduced instantly. You aren't surprised? The skeletal man asked, wiping blood from his chin. A warrior's outward appearance is often a mask used to intimidate his enemies, Izuku replied evenly, his voice echoing Jin Sakai's cadence. Your true battle is internal. You are dying. Toshinori Yagi stared at the boy in shock. How could a middle schooler deduce that so quickly? You're perceptive, kid. Yes. I suffered a massive injury 5 years ago. My respiratory system was nearly destroyed, and I lost my entire stomach. I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day now. Toshinori walked over to the edge of the roof, sitting down heavily against the railing. You asked if you can be a hero without a quirk? Seeing as you are so observant, I will give you the harsh truth. He looked down at his bony hands. Pros are always risking their lives. Some villains just can't be beaten without power. Can you be a hero without a quirk? No. I don't think you can. The words hung in the air. If this had been yesterday, Izuku Midoriya's heart would have shattered. He would have fallen to his knees, weeping, his lifelong dream crushed by his idol. But Izuku just stood there. The wind whipped his messy green hair around his face. If you want to help people, Toshinori continued gently, trying to soften the blow, you can become a police officer. They get mocked because villains are delivered to their doorstep, but it's a fine profession. He stood up, heading toward the roof access door. It's not bad to dream, kid, but you have to consider what's realistic. The door clicked shut. Izuku was alone on the roof. He walked to the edge and looked down at the sprawling, futuristic metropolis of Muzurifu. It was a world of metal, glass, and neon. It was not the rolling green hills of Tsushima. It was not the bamboo forests of Hyoshi. He closed his eyes. You have no quirk, Izuku. You should give up. The doctor's voice from when he was 4. I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry. His mother's tears. You're just a quirkless Deku. Bakugo's explosions. No. I don't think you can. All Might's final verdict. Izuku opened his eyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, jagged piece of glass he had subconsciously picked up in the underpass during the fight. He pressed his thumb against the sharp edge until a single drop of blood welled up. The sharp sting of pain anchored him to the present, proving he was awake, proving he was real. All Might is right, Izuku whispered to the empty air. He looked down at his own reflection in a puddle of water on the roof. He saw the freckled, unassuming face of a child. A hero needs a quirk. A hero needs to stand in the light, to smile, to be a symbol. A hero fights with honor. He tightened his grip on the glass, feeling the ancient, relentless spirit of Jin Sakai burning in his chest. But honor died on the beach. Izuku turned away from the ledge. He didn't need a quirk. He had fought warlords, demons, and armies with nothing but a sword, a bow, and his wits. He had forsaken the samurai code to save his people. He had become a creature of nightmare to those who preyed on the weak. The heroes of this era were like the samurai of Tsushima, shackled by their rules, their public image, their need to fight flashy, destructive battles in broad daylight. They fought for rankings, for merchandise, for glory. If they were the samurai, then Izuku would be something else. He walked down the stairwell, his steps silent, practicing the breathing techniques of his past life to calm his racing heart. Inhale for 4. Hold for 2. Exhale for 6. He felt the erratic, anxious energy of Izuku Midoriya melding seamlessly into the cold, calculated focus of the ghost. When he stepped out onto the street, the world felt different. His senses, previously dulled by a lifetime of cowering, were hyperacute. He could hear the hum of electricity in the power lines overhead. He could smell the subtle shift in the air pressure that signaled a coming storm, and he felt the wind. It tugged at his uniform, swirling around him in a tight vortex before blowing steadily down the street to his left. The guiding wind? In his past life, it was a manifestation of his father's spirit, guiding him across Tsushima. Now, he didn't know whose spirit it was, perhaps his own past self, but he knew what it meant. It was leading him toward danger. Izuku followed the wind. His gait had changed. He no longer walked with hunched shoulders and a lowered head. He walked with the silent, gliding step of a shinobi, his center of gravity low, his eyes constantly scanning his periphery for threats, cover, and weapons. As he approached the Tatooine shopping district, he smelled it before he saw it. Smoke. burning plastic and wood. He rounded the corner and saw a crowd gathered behind yellow police tape. A massive fire was raging in the alleyway. Explosions echoed, rattling the windows of nearby shops. Izuku slipped through the crowd, his small stature and silent footsteps allowing him to bypass the onlookers without anyone noticing. He reached the front line and assessed the situation. Pro-heroes were on the scene. Death Arms, Kamui Woods, Empty Lady, and Backdraft. They are standing still, Izuku noted, his eyes narrowing. Death Arms was holding back the crowd. Empty Lady was complaining about the alley being too narrow for her gigantification. Kamui Woods was hesitating, clearly wary of the fire that countered his wooden quirk. Backdraft was focused solely on putting out the surrounding fires, ignoring the center of the conflict. Izuku looked to the center of the flames, the sludge villain. He had escaped All Might. How? Izuku immediately realized it must have happened when All Might jumped with him. The bottle must have fallen. But that didn't matter right now. What mattered was what the sludge villain was holding. Trapped in the suffocating mass of liquid was a boy with ash-blonde hair, thrashing wildly, setting off explosions from his palms in a desperate bid for freedom. Katsuki Bakugo. It's no use. Death Arms yelled over the roar of the fire. None of us have the right quirks to stop this guy. We have to wait for someone with a suitable quirk to show up. Izuku stared at the heroes. A profound sense of disgust washed over him. Wait, they were waiting? A boy was suffocating. He was drowning in mud, his eyes wide with an agonizing terror that Izuku himself had intimately experienced just an hour ago. And these supposed warriors were standing by, doing nothing, because the conditions of the battle were not in their favor? A true warrior does not wait for favorable winds. He commands the storm. Izuku looked at Bakugo's face. Through the sludge, their eyes met. For the first time in his life, Katsuki Bakugo was not looking at Izuku with anger or superiority. He was looking at him with desperate, pleading terror. He was begging for help. Before Izuku's conscious mind could process the decision, his body moved. He didn't charge in wildly. He didn't scream or yell to announce his presence. The ghost did not announce his strikes. He slipped under the police tape like a shadow. As he moved, his eyes scanned the debris scattered across the alleyway. A shattered storefront had left shards of thick, jagged glass strewn across the pavement. Izuku scooped up a large, dagger-shaped shard of glass. He tore a strip of fabric from his ruined school uniform and quickly wrapped it around the blunt end to protect his hand, creating an improvised tanto, short sword, on the run. Hey! Kid! Stop! You'll die! Death Arms roared, finally noticing the green-haired blur darting into the inferno. Izuku tuned him out. The heat of the fire licked at his skin, but it was nothing compared to the burning forges of Komoda. He focused entirely on the sludge villain. The enemy is fluid. Explosions are keeping the fluid agitated, preventing it from solidifying around the hostage entirely. The eyes are the weak point. But he is guarding them now. You again? The sludge villain roared, recognizing Izuku. I'll make sure you stay dead this time. The villain whipped a massive tendril of sludge toward Izuku's head. Izuku didn't flinch. He dropped into wind stance, a style perfected to counter spear wielders and heavy, sweeping attacks. He slid perfectly beneath the horizontal swipe, his knees grazing the pavement. As he slid, he reached into his pocket with his left hand and pulled out a handful of ash and dirt he had scooped up near the fire's edge. He threw the dirt directly into the sludge villain's right eye. Ack! My eye! The villain shrieked, recoiling. The momentary distraction was all Izuku needed. He closed the distance, stepping inside the villain's guard. He ignored the burning heat of Bakugo's chaotic explosions. Izuku shifted into stone stance, meant for heavy, penetrating strikes. He gripped his improvised glass dagger with both hands, lowering his center of gravity to the earth. With a guttural, silent exhale, Izuku drove the jagged glass deep into the villain's uninjured left eye, plunging it to the hilt. The shriek that erupted from the villain was deafening. The sludge writhed in absolute agony, the structural integrity of the liquid collapsing as the host experienced agonizing, blinding pain. The sludge around Bakugo's face loosened. Izuku didn't hesitate. He grabbed Bakugo by the collar of his uniform. Planting his foot squarely on the sludge villain's solidified teeth for leverage, Izuku yanked backward with all his might. The ancient muscle memory, combined with the pure adrenaline of the moment, allowed him to rip Bakugo entirely free from the villain's grasp. The two boys tumbled backward onto the pavement, rolling away from the thrashing, blinded monster. Izuku immediately scrambled to his feet, placing himself between the wheezing Bakugo and the villain. He held his bloody, makeshift glass dagger in a reverse grip, his eyes cold, ready to strike again if the beast recovered. But it didn't have the chance. A shadow fell over them. "I really am pathetic," a voice muttered. All Might stood there, in his muscle form, blood leaking from the corner of his mouth. "I told you what makes a hero, yet I wasn't practicing what I preached." All Might grabbed the wrists of the villain as it blindly lashed out. Detroit. Smash! The downward punch created a localized tornado. The air pressure extinguished the surrounding fires instantly, and blew the sludge villain apart once and for all. The force of the wind was so intense it caused rain to begin falling from the newly formed clouds above. Silence fell over the alleyway, save for the patter of the artificial rain. Izuku stood completely still, his breathing even. He dropped the glass shard. It shattered on the pavement, washing clean in the rain. Immediately, the pro-heroes swarmed them. "Are you insane?" Death Arms barked, grabbing Izuku by the shoulder and spinning him around. "You could have gotten yourself killed. There was absolutely no reason for you to run in there. We had it handled, you just got in the way," Kamui Woods chimed in. "Your recklessness nearly cost the hostage his life. Leave this to the professionals, kid." In the past, Izuku would have bowed his head, crying, apologizing profusely for being a burden. Today, Izuku Midoriya slapped Death Arm's hand away. The crack of the slap echoed loudly, silencing the pro-heroes. Izuku looked up at Death Arms. The veteran hero involuntarily took a half-step back. The boy's eyes were terrifying. They were empty of fear, devoid of respect, and filled with a quiet, smoldering contempt. "You had nothing handled," Izuku said, his voice quiet, yet carrying effortlessly over the murmur of the crowd. "Excuse me?" Death Arms bristled, his face reddening. "You stood on the sidelines while a captive was slowly suffocated to death," Izuku stated, his tone factual, unyielding. "You prioritized your own tactical disadvantages over the life of a citizen. You did not attempt to rescue. You did not attempt a distraction. You waited." Izuku swept his gaze over Kamui Woods and Empty Lady. "A warrior protects those who cannot protect themselves. If you are unwilling to risk your lives when the odds are against you, take off your costumes. You are not heroes. You are cowards playing dress-up." The absolute silence that followed was suffocating. The pro-heroes stared at him, completely flabbergasted, deeply insulted, yet fundamentally unable to argue with the cold, hard truth of the boy's words. Izuku didn't wait for a response. He turned his back on them, a massive insult in the martial world, and walked away. A few feet away, Bakugo was sitting on the ground, paramedics checking his vitals. He stared at Izuku as he walked past. Bakugo's mouth opened, perhaps to hurl an insult, perhaps to demand an explanation for what the hell Deku just did. But the words died in his throat. The boy walking past him was not Deku. The posture, the silence, the sheer, oppressive aura of lethal intent radiating off him. Bakugo felt a shiver run down his spine. Izuku walked through the crowd, parting them like water. No one tried to stop him. He walked into the setting sun, the rain slicking his green hair against his forehead. He felt the dull ache in his muscles, the bruises forming on his neck. His body was weak. It was untrained. It was fragile. "But my spirit is forged in steel," he thought. He had a long road ahead of him. If he was going to walk the path of the ghost in a world of heroes, he needed to forge his body. He needed weapons. He needed tools. He needed to prepare for war, because if villains like the sludge monster were common in this era, the innocent were in grave danger. The wind picked up, swirling the fallen leaves of a nearby park around his feet, guiding him toward home. Izuku Midoriya smiled. A small, dangerous smirk that belonged to a man who had conquered the Mongol Empire from the shadows. "The wind is at my back," Izuku whispered into the evening air. "Let the invasion begin." The walk back to the Midoriya apartment was a study in duality. The streets of Mizudafu were painted in the vibrant, artificial hues of neon signs and streetlights, casting long, modern shadows over the concrete. Cars hummed past, their tires hissing against the rain-slicked asphalt. The world was loud, fast, and entirely built upon the foundation of quirks. Yet, within the mind of a 14-year-old boy walking with his hands in his pockets, the world was utterly silent. Izuku Midoriya felt as though he was walking through a dream, or perhaps waking up from one. The memories of Jin Sakai, the ghost of Tsushima, were no longer a rushing torrent threatening to drown his consciousness. They had settled into the very marrow of his bones. He could remember the exact weight of the Sakai katana. He could recall the smell of the autumn leaves in the golden forest, the bitter taste of poison on a blowgun dart, and the agonizing, heart-wrenching scream of his horse, Nobu, on the snowy plains of Kamiagata. He was Izuku. He was Jin. The two identities had bled together like ink spilled on parchment, creating a new, singular tapestry. Izuku's hyper-analytical mind, a mind that had spent a decade dissecting the intricate mechanics of quirks and modern hero tactics, was now running the ancient, lethal algorithms of the ghost. Deku! The voice barked from the mouth of a dark alleyway, shattering the quiet solitude. Izuku stopped. He didn't jump. His shoulders didn't hike up to his ears in a panic. He simply pivoted on his heel, his center of gravity dropping a fraction of an inch, his eyes scanning the darkness before locking onto the source. Katsuki Bakugo stood under a flickering street lamp, his chest heaving slightly as if he had run all the way here just to catch Izuku before he reached home. His school uniform was still singed and reeked of smoke and sewer water. For a moment either boy spoke. Bakugo's crimson eyes, usually burning with an explosive superiority, were narrowed in a chaotic mix of anger, confusion, and a lingering, unrecognized trace of fear. He remembered the look in Izuku's eyes when the green-haired boy had plunged that glass shard into the sludge villain. It wasn't the desperate, flailing heroism of a wannabe. It was an executioner's strike. What the hell was that today? Bakugo demanded, his voice dropping an octave, lacking its usual screaming cadence. Did you think you were being a hero? Did you think I needed your help, you quirkless nobody? I had it under control. Izuku looked at Bakugo. He saw the pride masking the terror. In his past life, Jin had known many men like Bakugo, samurai who would rather choke on their own blood than admit they had been outmaneuvered, men who clung to their pride even as the Mongols burned their homes. Lord Shimura had been one of them. You were dying, Kaken, Izuku said softly. The sheer neutrality of Izuku's voice hit Bakugo harder than a shout. I wasn't dying. I was waiting for the right opening. Bakugo snapped, small sparks igniting in his palms. You didn't do anything. You just got in the way. Don't think for a second that whatever cheap trick you pulled makes you better than me. You're still just a pebble in my path. Izuku held Bakugo's gaze. The wind ghosted down the street, rustling Izuku's ruined uniform. You fight loud, Kaken, Izuku replied, his tone devoid of malice, offering only a cold observation. Your power is immense, like a cannon on a battlefield. It commands attention. It breaks the enemy's front line. Bakugo blinked, slightly derailed by the unexpected, analytical praise. Damn right it does. But a cannon is easily flanked, Izuku continued, taking a slow step toward Bakugo. His footsteps made absolutely no sound against the wet pavement. When the enemy does not stand in front of you, when they surround you, when they suffocate you, a cannon cannot fire inward without destroying itself. You rely entirely on your power to overwhelm. But wars are not won by power alone. They are won in the silence. What the hell are you babbling about? Bakugo snarled, though he involuntarily took a half-step back as Izuku drew nearer. I am saying, Izuku stopped just out of striking distance, that if you continue to believe that your strength makes you invincible, you will die. And next time, I might not be there to cut you loose. Before Bakugo could process the sheer audacity, the sheer authority, radiating from the quirkless boy, Izuku bowed slightly at the waist, a perfect, traditional display of respect that felt incredibly out of place, and walked past him into the night. Bakugo stood frozen under the flickering light, his hands trembling. He wanted to chase him, to blast him into the concrete, to force Deku back into the cowering, crying box he belonged in. But his instincts, honed by a lifetime of combat-oriented quirk usage, screamed at him not to engage. A few blocks later, Izuku's path was blocked once more. I am here! A massive figure burst from a side street, skidding to a halt in front of Izuku. All Might, in all his towering, muscular glory, struck a pose, a wide smile plastered across his face. Izuku sighed internally, though his face remained a stoic mask. He is tracking me. He moves fast, but his landings are heavy. He does not know how to mask his presence. All Might, Izuku acknowledged respectfully, halting his advance. Have you concluded your interviews with the press? Indeed I have, my boy. All Might bellowed, before suddenly doubling over in a fit of violent coughing. Steam erupted from his massive frame, billowing down the street and obscuring him from view. When the steam cleared, the number 1 hero was gone, replaced once more by Toshinori Yagi, the skeletal, hollow-cheeked man in baggy clothes, wiping a trickle of blood from his chin. Ah, much better, Toshinori groaned, stretching his back. He looked at Izuku, his expression shifting from a heroic facade to a solemn, profound seriousness. Young man, I came to find you because I have a correction to make. And a proposition. Izuku tilted his head slightly. A correction? Earlier today, on that rooftop, I told you that you could not be a hero without a quirk. I told you to be realistic. Toshinori took a step forward, his blue eyes piercing through the shadows. But then I watched you. I stood there, paralyzed by my own limits, watching those professionals do nothing. But you, a timid, quirkless boy, you ran into the fire. Toshinori placed a bony hand over his heart. You taught me a lesson today, kid. Top heroes have stories about them from their school days. Most of their stories have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. Izuku remained silent. His body hadn't moved before he thought. His body had moved because he had thought. He had calculated the risk, identified the enemy's weak point, formulated a strategy, and executed it with lethal precision. But he understood what the man meant. The spirit of self-sacrifice. You can become a hero, Toshinori declared, the words hanging in the cool night air like a sacred vow. It was the phrase Izuku Midoriya had waited 14 years to hear. It was the absolute validation of his existence. Deep within his chest, the remnants of the child he had been wept with joy. But Jin Sakai anchored him, observing the skeletal man with analytical caution. Thank you, All Might, Izuku said softly, bowing his head. Those words mean more to me than you could possibly know. Good. Toshinori smiled, a genuine, warm expression. Because I deem you worthy of inheriting my power. Izuku slowly raised his head, his emerald eyes locking onto Toshinori's. Inheriting your quirk? Is such a thing possible? It is the greatest secret of my life, Toshinori confessed, leaning against a brick wall. My quirk is not naturally occurring. It is a sacred torch, passed down from generation to generation. It is the crystallization of power, stockpiled over decades, designed to smash through the darkness and save those in need. It is called One for All. Toshinori extended a hand toward Izuku. I have been searching for a successor. Someone with the true heart of a hero. Today, you showed me that heart. You rushed in when no one else would. You have the courage. If you accept, I will train you. I will mold you into the next symbol of peace. You will inherit One for All, and you will become the greatest hero of this era. The offer hung between them, shimmering with unimaginable weight and promise. The power of a god, handed to a mortal. The ability to shatter buildings with a single punch, to move faster than the eye could track, to become a beacon of hope for billions. Izuku looked at Toshinori's extended hand. He closed his eyes. In his mind's eye, he saw the power of One for All. He had analyzed it for years. It was a force of absolute, concussive destruction. It was thunder and lightning. It was the sun itself, burning away the shadows, leaving nowhere to hide. You have no honor! Lord Shimura's voice echoed in his memory. Honor means nothing if my people are dead. Jin's voice replied. If Izuku took this power, he would become a symbol. He would stand in the light. He would be forced to fight on the enemy's terms, in grand arenas, in the middle of ruined city streets, trading blows in a spectacle of destruction where civilians could be caught in the crossfire. One for All was not a scalpel. It was a war hammer. The ghost did not use war hammers. The ghost used shadows. The ghost struck from behind, poisoned the enemy's supplies, terrified their ranks, and dismantled them before a battle could even begin. Taking one for all would require Izuku to abandon the lethal, pragmatic instincts of his past life. It would require him to fight with the blinding, rigid honor that had nearly doomed Tsushima. Izuku opened his eyes. He took a step back, out of the reach of Toshinori's extended hand. "I am deeply honored, All Might," Izuku said, his voice steady, carrying the gravelly weight of a seasoned warlord. "More honored than words can express. But I must decline." Toshinori's hand froze in midair. His eyes widened in absolute shock. The wind seemed to die in the street. You decline? Young man, do you understand what I am offering you? This is the power to save everyone. This is the power to make your dream a reality. I understand exactly what you are offering, Izuku replied gently. You are offering me the sun. But I have spent my entire life in the shadows, All Might. And I have learned how to see in the dark. Toshinori dropped his hand, coughing violently, utterly bewildered. Kid, I don't understand. Today, I maimed a villain, Izuku interrupted, his tone chillingly factual. I did not overpower him. I did not smash him. I blinded him with dirt, and I drove a shard of glass into his eye to force him to release the hostage. I fought dirty. I fought without honor. Toshinori stared at the boy. The realization hit him like a physical blow. When All Might had arrived on the scene, he had only seen the aftermath, the boy pulling the hostage away. He hadn't seen the strike. Your quirk, one for all, is a beacon, Izuku explained, turning his gaze toward the distant, glowing skyline of Muzurifu. A beacon draws the enemy's eyes. It requires you to stand in front of the innocent and take the blow. But what happens when the enemy realizes they don't have to fight you? What happens when they aim for the people behind you while you are distracted by your own light? Izuku looked back at the skeletal hero. I cannot inherit your quirk, All Might, because your power is too loud. It destroys the battlefield. It warns the enemy that you are coming. I cannot fight like that. I will not give my enemies the courtesy of a fair fight. Toshinori felt a cold sweat break out on his neck. The boy in front of him was 14 years old, yet he spoke with the ruthless, pragmatic philosophy of a military veteran who had survived a meat grinder. The innocence Toshinori thought he had seen was actually something far more dangerous. A calm, calculated resolve to do whatever was necessary. You intend to become a hero by acting like a villain? Toshinori asked, his voice tight. I intend to become a terror to those who prey on the weak, Izuku corrected, his emerald eyes hardening into polished jade. If a villain wishes to harm a citizen, I will not stand in the street and trade blows with him. I will strike him from the shadows. I will cripple his limbs. I will make him so afraid of the dark that he will never raise his hand against an innocent again. Izuku bowed again, a deeper, more profound bow. Keep your sacred torch, All Might. Find someone who can bear its light without burning the world around them. I have a different path to walk, the way of the ghost. Without another word, Izuku turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the alleyway, leaving the number one hero standing alone in the street, haunted by a phantom he could not understand. Sleep did not come easily to Izuku that night. His small bedroom, plastered with All Might posters and hero merchandise, felt alien to him. The smiling faces of the colorful heroes mocked the grim reality of the world he knew. By 3 a.m., he was wide awake, sitting on his bed in the dark, the memories of Tsushima flashing behind his eyelids like lightning in a storm. He needed to move. He needed to train. In his past life, a samurai's body was a weapon forged over decades of relentless discipline. His current body was soft. He had no stamina, no calluses on his hands, no core strength to speak of. If he attempted the dance of wrath right now, the sheer kinetic torque would likely shatter his own femurs. He dressed quickly in a pair of old sweatpants and a dark, unmarked hoodie. He slipped out of his apartment window, utilizing the fire escape to avoid waking his mother. As his feet touched the pavement, the phantom wind returned. It blew past him, a cold, salty breeze that smelled of rust and the sea. The guiding wind? Izuku closed his eyes and let his senses expand. The wind wasn't a hallucination. It was a manifestation of his spatial awareness, a supernatural intuition born from the merging of two souls. It was pulling him toward the coast. He ran. His stamina gave out after 3 blocks, forcing him into a jog, and then a walk, his lungs burning. He cursed his physical weakness, but his mind remained focused. 45 minutes later, as the first hints of dawn began to paint the horizon in bruised shades of purple, Izuku arrived at Dagoba Municipal Beach. Or rather, what used to be a beach. Before him lay a staggering, apocalyptic mountain range of illegal dumping. Refrigerators, rusted cars, washing machines, broken furniture, and mountains of twisted scrap metal stretched for miles along the coastline. The tide crashed against the junk, creating a sorrowful, metallic symphony. A normal teenager would have seen a tragedy of environmental neglect. Izuku Midoriya, the reincarnated ghost, saw a sanctuary. Perfect, he whispered. This place was isolated. It was dangerous, filled with unstable structures and hidden pitfalls. The perfect terrain for practicing stealth, free running, and vertical mobility. Most importantly, it was an infinite, unregulated supply of raw materials. Izuku waded into the labyrinth of trash. He moved carefully, his eyes scanning the debris. He was looking for something specific. After 10 minutes of searching, he found it resting beneath a cracked microwave, a solid, 3-foot length of galvanized steel piping. It was heavy, coated in a thin layer of rust, and roughly the diameter of a katana's tsuka hilt. He picked it up, feeling the weight. It was poorly balanced, front-heavy, and brutal. It wasn't a sword. But for now, it would serve as his bakken. Izuku found a small clearing of sand amidst the towering walls of junk. He stood in the center, facing the ocean. He stripped off his hoodie, leaving him in a white t-shirt. The morning air was freezing, but he ignored it. He gripped the pipe with both hands. His right hand near the top, his left hand at the base. Stone stance, he muttered to the ocean. He dropped his center of gravity, sinking into a wide, grounded stance. The stone stance was the fundamental fighting style of the Sakai clan, designed to shatter the guards of swordsmen. It required explosive core strength and heavy, downward kinetic energy. Izuku took a breath and executed a basic overhead strike. The pipe cut through the air with a heavy whoosh. But the moment he stopped the swing, a sharp, searing pain tore through his forearms and shoulders. His wrists buckled slightly, unable to properly absorb the shock of halting the heavy steel pipe's momentum. He stumbled forward, almost dropping the weapon. Izuku grit his teeth, falling to one knee. His muscles were screaming. His tendons felt like overstretched rubber bands. Weak, he chided himself. The mind knows the path, but the vessel is cracked. He stood back up. He adjusted his grip. Again, he swung the pipe. Downward strike. Side sweep. Thrust. Pain. His palms began to blister almost immediately. The rust acted like sandpaper against his soft skin. Again, he shifted his footing. Water stance. Designed for fluidity, used to bypass the heavy shields of brutes. He let the pipe flow in continuous, sweeping arcs. His footwork was flawless in theory, but his weak ankles threatened to roll with every sudden pivot in the loose sand. Again, wind stance. He envisioned a spear-wielding Mongol, or a villain with extended reach. He practiced stepping into the strike, kicking up a spray of sand, using the momentum of the pipe to parry an invisible thrust before delivering a crippling blow to the knee. Again, moon stance, the stance of the brute. Heavy, spinning strikes designed to stagger massive opponents. He launched into a spin, swinging the heavy pipe. His core gave out. He lost his balance, tumbling hard into the sand, the steel pipe painfully cracking against his own shin. Izuku lay on his back, gasping for air, staring up at the lightning sky. His body was on fire. His hands were bleeding, the blisters having popped and rubbed raw against the steel. He closed his eyes. In his mind he heard the voice of his uncle, Lord Shimura, from a memory decades old. Pain is the forge that hardens the steel of your spirit, Jin. Yield to it, and you break. Embrace it, and you become unbreakable. Izuku opened his eyes. The emerald irises flashed with a terrifying, unyielding resolve. He pushed himself up. He picked up the blood-stained steel pipe. He wrapped his torn, bleeding hands around the metal. Again. For the next 3 months, Izuku Midoriya ceased to exist outside of school hours. He became a ghost haunting the labyrinth of Dagoba Beach. His training was not the heroic, montage-worthy endeavor of dragging refrigerators to build muscle. Izuku wasn't trying to become a bodybuilder. He was building a shinobi's physique: lean, wire-taut muscle, explosive fast-twitch fibers, and infinite cardiovascular endurance. He ran through the unstable mountains of trash, practicing his parkour. He learned to move silently over crunching metal and broken glass, constantly checking his balance, softening his footfalls by landing on the balls of his feet and absorbing the shock with his knees. He practiced vertical scaling, using the jagged edges of cars to haul himself up 3 stories of junk in seconds. His body transformed. The baby fat melted away, replaced by dense, corded muscle. His hands became rough and heavily calloused, impervious to the friction of his steel pipe. But physical training was only half of the ghost's arsenal. Jin Sakai was a master of unconventional warfare. Izuku Midoriya was a genius-level tactician who understood modern chemistry and engineering. When the two combined, the results were terrifying. Deep within a hollowed-out shipping container in the center of the beach, Izuku established his forge. He scavenged everything. He stole his mother's unused chemistry kit. He bought bulk amounts of cold packs, stump remover, charcoal, and sulfur from local hardware stores using his allowance. In the dim light of a battery-powered lantern, Izuku sat at a makeshift workbench, an overturned door balanced on 2 cinder blocks, grinding charcoal into a fine powder using a heavy stone, black powder. The weapon of the Mongols, adopted by the ghost. Izuku meticulously measured the ratios: potassium nitrate from the stump remover, charcoal, and sulfur. He didn't just want explosive bombs, he wanted utility. He scavenged dozens of empty soda cans, cutting them down to size. Inside, he packed the black powder mixture, along with a secondary mixture of potassium nitrate and sugar. When ignited, this combination produced thick, blinding, choking white smoke. He used the strikers from matches and a simple pull-string mechanism made from wire to create instantaneous smoke bombs. Loud quirks rely on vision, Izuku muttered to himself, his face covered by a makeshift cloth mask to avoid inhaling the chemical dust. Blind a brute, and his strength is useless. Blind a speedster, and they crash. He carefully placed the finished smoke bombs into a padded cardboard box. Next, he turned to his weaponry. The steel pipe had served him well, but he needed the tools of an assassin. He needed kunai, throwing knives. He scoured the beach for high-carbon steel, eventually finding a demolished suspension spring from a large truck. Using a scavenged hacksaw, files, and a blowtorch he found half buried in the sand, Izuku spent weeks painstakingly cutting, heating, and grinding the metal down. It was agonizing, slow work. Without a proper anvil, he used the flat engine block of a rusted car. His hammer strikes echoed through the beach late into the night. Clang! 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 The rhythm of the forge grounded him. With every strike, he poured the frustrations of his life, the trauma of his past, and his absolute, unwavering resolve into the metal. He produced a set of 10 kunai. They were not pretty. They lacked the polished gleam of professional support gear. The metal was dark, pitted, and rough, wrapped in torn leather from car seats at the hilts. But the edges were terrifyingly sharp, honed to a razor finish on a whetstone. He took one of the kunai outside. He stood 20 paces from a wooden pallet propped against a washing machine. Izuku didn't throw it like a baseball. He held it by the blade, snapping his wrist with a flicking motion that utilized his entire arm's kinetic chain. Thwack! The kunai buried itself 2 inches deep into the wood, dead center. Izuku's eyes were cold. 10 paces. Lethal. Finally, he needed a primary weapon. He couldn't walk around modern Japan with a live katana. He would be arrested instantly. Furthermore, while the ghost was willing to kill if absolutely necessary to save a life, Izuku understood that modern laws required restraint. He needed a weapon that could break bones, shatter defenses, and incapacitate without severing limbs. He found his answer in the structural frame of an old, heavy-duty oak bed frame. Using his tools, he carved the oak into the shape of a standard katana. But wood alone would break against a strengthening quirk. So, Izuku returned to the metal scrap. He forged thin strips of steel and bolted them along the spine of the wooden blade, reinforcing its structural integrity. He wrapped the hilt in proper grip tape. He held the finished weapon up to the moonlight. It was a bakken, but heavily armored. It had the weight and balance of a real sword, but the blunt, bone-crushing force of a mace. Izuku swung it. The heavy ironwood and steel cut through the air with a deep, menacing hum. The Sakai steel, Izuku whispered, slipping the bakken into a custom leather sheath he had fashioned for his back. He was no longer just a boy with memories. He was armed. He was dangerous. It was month 8 of his training. The UA entrance exam was only 2 months away. Izuku sat perfectly still on the roof of a rusted bus near the edge of Dagoba Beach. He was meditating, his legs crossed, his breathing slow and rhythmic. The ocean breeze blew across his face. He was wearing his makeshift support gear, dark cargo pants, a tight black long-sleeve shirt, a utility belt loaded with his smoke bombs and kunai, and his reinforced bakken strapped to his back. A dark green cloth mask covered the lower half of his face, pulling up over his nose. He was focusing on the guiding wind. It wasn't a physical breeze anymore. It was a pressure in his skull, a tingling at the base of his neck. It was his brain processing microsensory inputs. The sound of shifting sand, the smell of cheap cologne mixed with ozone, the subtle change in ambient light. Snap! The sound was distant, maybe 50 yards away, deeper into the labyrinth of trash. A piece of glass breaking under a heavy boot. Izuku's eyes snapped open. The guiding wind rushed past him, pointing directly toward the center of the beach. Izuku moved. He dropped off the bus, landing in a silent crouch. He sprinted through the shadows of the junk, moving with the terrifying silence of a predator. He scaled the side of a rusted crane, perching on the metal boom, looking down into a small clearing below. 3 men stood in the clearing. They were older, heavily tattooed, and reeked of cheap alcohol. One of them had hands made of literal stone. Another had small, functional wings on his back. The third, clearly the leader, was holding a duffel bag and arguing with a fourth man, a jittery, nervous-looking guy in a suit. "I don't care about your boss's timeline," the leader growled, his jaw unhinging slightly, revealing rows of shark-like teeth. "The trigger drug is high risk. You pay double, or we dump it in the ocean. An illegal quirk-enhancing drug deal." Izuku knelt on the crane, his eyes cold. This beach was his sanctuary. These men were bringing poison to his shores. He could have called the police. He could have anonymously tipped off a pro-hero. But the ghost did not wait for the law. Izuku reached to his belt. He unclipped 2 smoke bombs. Down below, the man in the suit was shaking. Fine, I have the cash." Clatter. A small, metallic canister bounced off the hood of a nearby car and rolled into the center of the group. "Huh! What the hell is?" the leader started. Hiss. A deafening, shrill sound erupted from the canisters, immediately followed by a massive, violent explosion of thick, blinding white smoke. Ack! My eyes! What is this? The winged man screamed, coughing violently as the chemical smoke burned his lungs. Ambush! It's the cops! The stone-handed thug yelled, swinging his fists blindly into the smoke. From his perch on the crane, Izuku dropped. He fell 20 feet, completely silent. He aimed for the man with the wings. As he fell, he extended his legs, driving his knees directly into the man's shoulders. Crack! The winged man didn't even have time to scream before the sheer kinetic force of the drop-down assassination technique drove him face-first into the sand, knocking him out instantly. Izuku rolled off the unconscious body, instantly enveloped by the thick smoke of his own making. "Ryu? Where are you?" the leader yelled, coughing. Izuku moved like a phantom through the white cloud. He drew his reinforced bakken. The stone-handed thug was swinging wildly. Izuku stepped directly into his guard, slipping under a wild haymaker. He shifted into water stance. With a brutal, sweeping upward strike, Izuku slammed the steel-reinforced ironwood directly under the thug's chin. The blow lifted the heavy man off his feet. Before he hit the ground, Izuku pivoted, driving the butt of the bakken into the man's solar plexus, entirely collapsing his diaphragm. The thug hit the sand, gasping, unable to breathe, effectively neutralized. 2 down in less than 4 seconds. The smoke began to clear slightly, carried away by the ocean breeze. The leader, realizing he was the only one left standing among his crew, panicked. His jaw unhinged completely, revealing terrifying teeth. "Who's there? Show yourself!" Izuku stepped out of the swirling white smoke, 20 feet away. The moonlight caught the dark metal bracing of his Bakken. His green eyes, entirely devoid of emotion, locked onto the thug. A kid? The leader laughed nervously, though sweat was pouring down his face. You took down my guys with a cheap trick, you little brat? I'll tear you apart. The leader charged, his mouth wide open, intending to bite Izuku in half. Izuku didn't assume a stance. He stood perfectly straight, his Bakken resting casually by his side. He waited. 10 paces. 5 paces. 3 paces. At the absolute last possible second, Izuku's left hand blurred to his belt. He flicked his wrist. A heavy, dark kunai shot through the air. It didn't aim for flesh. It struck the thug's left kneecap with a sickening thud. Ag! The leader's leg buckled instantly, his momentum sending him crashing into the sand right at Izuku's feet. He clutched his knee, shrieking in agony, blood pouring between his fingers. Izuku stepped forward. He placed the heavy steel tip of his Bakken directly against the back of the leader's neck, pressing down just enough to let the man feel the weight of a broken spine. Listen to me carefully. Izuku's voice was a harsh, gravelly whisper, sounding absolutely demonic through his cloth mask. If you ever bring poison to this beach again, I will not aim for your knee. The leader, weeping in pain and absolute terror, nodded frantically against the sand. Okay. Okay. Please. What are you? Izuku looked up at the moon, hanging heavy over the ocean. He didn't answer. He sheathed his Bakken, turned, and melted back into the shadows of the junk, disappearing as quickly and completely as a phantom wind. By the time the police arrived, called by the terrified man in the suit who had run for his life, they found 3 battered, terrified thugs, a duffel bag of drugs, and no sign of their attacker. The thugs swore they had been attacked by a demon in the smoke. From the roof of a distant apartment building, Izuku Midoriya watched the police cruisers flash their red and blue lights. He pulled down his mask, taking a deep breath of the crisp night air. His body was hardened. His weapons were forged. His mind was absolute. In 2 months the gates of UA High School would open for the entrance exam. They were expecting children with flashy powers. They were expecting aspiring heroes ready to stand in the light. Izuku turned away from the city, his green eyes burning with a silent, cold fire. The ghost was ready for war. The morning of the UA High School entrance exam arrived with a bitter, biting chill. The sky over Musudafu was a pale, bruised violet, the sun still struggling to pierce the thick layer of winter clouds. Inside the Midoriya apartment, all was quiet. Izuku stood before the full-length mirror in his bedroom. The walls, once plastered corner to corner with grinning, primary-colored posters of All Might, were now largely bare. Only a few remained, pushed to the periphery, replaced by detailed maps of the city, blueprints of heroes' support gear, and a small, meticulously maintained shrine on his desk. The shrine was simple, a wooden box holding a single stick of incense, dedicated to the memory of Clan Sakai, and by extension, the innocents he had buried on Dagoba Beach. He was not wearing his middle school uniform. Today, he was a soldier marching to war. He pulled on a skin-tight, long-sleeved black base layer, woven from a high-tensile synthetic fiber he had painstakingly ordered online using his saved allowance. Over it, he wore a dark green, sleeveless tunic, a subtle nod to both his natural hair color and the ghost armor he had once worn on the shores of Tsushima. His legs were clad in reinforced charcoal cargo pants, tucked securely into silent, rubber-soled tabi boots. But the clothes were just the canvas. The true arsenal lay in his gear. Izuku picked up his utility belt. It was thick, black leather, heavily modified. He strapped it around his waist, feeling the comforting, familiar weight of his tools settle against his hips. On his right hip rested 3 spherical pouches containing his homemade black powder smoke bombs. On his left, an array of 5 dark, heavy steel kunai rested in a custom-stitched thigh holster. Finally, he reached for the Sakai steel. His reinforced Bakken was a masterpiece of scavenged engineering. The ironwood core was wrapped in scarred grip tape, while the spine was bolted with strips of hardened steel. It rested in a dark leather scabbard. Izuku slid it onto his back, the strap crossing diagonally over his chest. He looked at his reflection. The round-faced, freckled boy who used to flinch at his own shadow was gone. The teenager staring back possessed eyes of polished jade, cold, ancient, and perfectly still. Izuku? The timid voice of his mother broke the silence. Izuku turned to see Inko Midoriya standing in the doorway. She was wringing her hands, her eyes wide with a mixture of profound love and deep-seated terror. She looked at his gear, the stern set of his jaw, the weapon on his back. Ever since the sludge villain incident 10 months ago, her son had changed. He didn't cry anymore. He didn't stutter. He disappeared into the night, and returned with calloused hands and a gaze that made her feel incredibly safe, yet incredibly sad. Are you sure about this, sweetie? Inko asked, her voice trembling. Yue is so dangerous. And without a quirk, Izuku walked over to her. He didn't offer a frantic, nervous ramble like he once would have. Instead, he placed a steady, heavily calloused hand on her shoulder. I have everything I need, mother, Izuku said, his voice a calm, gravelly baritone that always seemed to soothe her frayed nerves. I will return. It was a vow. A samurai's promise. He bowed slightly to her, a gesture of profound respect, before stepping past her and out the front door. He didn't take the train. The train was loud, crowded, and dulled the senses. Instead, he ran. He took to the rooftops where he could, his rubber soles making absolutely no sound against the concrete and shingles, letting the freezing morning wind fill his lungs. Yue High School was less a school and more a fortress. Its towering, H-shaped glass structures gleamed in the early morning light, surrounded by massive walls and reinforced gates. Thousands of students were pouring into the courtyard, a sea of varied uniforms, strange mutations, and nervous chatter. Izuku landed silently in an alleyway a block away, checking his gear one last time before stepping out into the throng of students. As he walked up the main path toward the entrance, he felt the stares. He was an anomaly. Everyone else was wearing their middle school uniforms. Izuku was dressed in tactical gear, carrying a very visible, steel-reinforced weapon on his back. Whispers trailed in his wake like autumn leaves. Is that a sword? He's allowed to bring that? Must be some kind of weapon-summoning quirk. Izuku ignored them. He kept his breathing steady, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd, identifying potential threats, evaluating gates, muscle mass, and hidden weapons. Out of my way, Deku! The harsh, grating bark was painfully familiar. Izuku paused and turned his head slightly. Katsuki Bakugo was storming up the path. He looked exactly the same as he had 10 months ago, exuding an aura of explosive arrogance. But as Bakugo's crimson eyes locked onto Izuku, his aggressive stride faltered for a fraction of a second. Bakugo hadn't seen Izuku since the sludge villain attack. The nerd had completely dropped off the map. Now, seeing him standing there, clad in dark tactical gear, carrying a weapon, radiating a cold, impenetrable calm, it sent an involuntary shiver down Bakugo's spine. Kaken, Izuku acknowledged softly, his voice carrying no fear, no reverence. Just a simple statement of fact. What the hell are you wearing? Bakugo sneered, recovering his bravado, though he kept a safe distance. You think strapping a stick to your back makes you a hero, you quirkless reject? They're gonna laugh you out of the exam. A sword is only a stick if the man holding it is a fool, Izuku replied evenly. He didn't adopt a fighting stance. He didn't even fully turn to face Bakugo. He simply looked at him over his shoulder. Focus on your own battle today, Kaken. The enemy will not accommodate your pride. Without waiting for a response, Izuku turned and continued walking. Bakugo stood frozen, his fists trembling with barely suppressed rage, yet once again, his instincts screamed at him not to engage. A few yards ahead, the crowd bottlenecked. Izuku seamlessly wove through the gaps in the crowd, moving with the fluid grace of water. Just ahead of him, a girl with a brown bob and a permanent blush on her cheeks tripped over a raised paving stone. She pitched forward, a gasp escaping her lips, bracing for the harsh impact of the concrete. Before she could activate her quirk to catch herself, a blur of dark green and black moved. Izuku didn't panic. His brain processed the trajectory of her fall in a millisecond. He stepped into her blind spot, dropped his center of gravity into a modified wind stance to absorb kinetic energy, and gently caught her by the shoulders. He fluidly spun her momentum into a graceful, controlled stop, setting her perfectly upright on her feet. The entire movement took less than a second. Achiko Uraraka blinked, entirely disoriented. One moment she was falling, the next she was standing perfectly still, enveloped in a faint scent of pine and black powder. She looked up. A boy with wild green eyes and a dark cloth mask pulled up over his nose was looking at her. His grip on her shoulders was firm but incredibly gentle. "Mind your footing," Izuku said, his voice a low, steady hum. "An uneven battlefield is the first enemy you must defeat." He released her, offered a brief, respectful nod, and continued walking toward the auditorium, melting back into the crowd before she could even process what had happened. "Whoa!" Uraraka whispered, her face flushing a deep crimson. A ninja. The orientation auditorium was vast, dark, and filled with the nervous energy of thousands of teenagers. Izuku sat in the middle row, his posture perfectly straight, his hands resting lightly on his knees. To his right sat Bakugo, who was currently glaring daggers at the side of Izuku's head. Izuku paid him no mind. On the stage, the voice hero, Present Mike, was putting on a spectacle. "Welcome to my live show, everybody!" Mike screamed, striking a pose. "Everybody say hey." Dead silence. Izuku analyzed the hero. Loud. Requires vocal cords and unblocked airways to manifest power. A strike to the throat, or a localized smoke bomb to induce coughing would render him entirely defenseless. Present Mike explained the parameters of the exam. A mock cityscape. 10 minutes. 4 types of robots, assigned point values from 0 to 3. Izuku pulled a small, folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was his official support item exception permit. UA allowed students to bring in support gear if it was pre-approved, usually for those with mutant quirks that required specific clothing. Izuku had heavily cited a loophole in the bylaws. As a quirkless applicant, his gear was his sole method of engagement. To deny him his gear was to deny him equal opportunity. The board, likely out of sheer curiosity, had approved it. "Excuse me." A tall boy with glasses and rigid posture stood up a few rows ahead, his hand raised like a spear. "On the printout, there are 4 types of villains. If this is a misprint, then UA, the most prominent school in Japan, should be ashamed of that foolish mistake." The boy then spun around, pointing a stiff finger directly at Izuku. "And you, in the back, with the tactical gear and the sword." Every head in the auditorium turned to look at Izuku. Bakugo leaned away, grinning fiercely, waiting for Deku to crumble under the pressure. "The rules clearly state this is a test of our inherent abilities." "Quirks!" the boy shouted. "Bringing a weapon into the exam is a blatant violation of the spirit of heroism. If you are here to play samurai, you should leave immediately." The crowd muttered in agreement. Izuku didn't flinch. He didn't blush. He didn't stammer. He slowly stood up. The scraping of his chair was the only sound in the dead silent auditorium. He looked down at the boy with glasses. "My name is Izuku Midoriya," he said. His voice was not loud, yet it possessed a cold, piercing acoustic quality that carried effortlessly to the front of the room. "And I have submitted and received approval for a support item exception under Section 4, Article 12 of the UA Admission Guidelines." Izuku locked eyes with the boy. "You speak of the spirit of heroism and inherent abilities. Tell me, if a hero is stripped of their quirk, are they no longer a hero? If a soldier loses his rifle, does he cease to be a warrior? A weapon is merely an extension of the wielder's intent. My intent is to dismantle the enemy. If your inherent ability requires you to complain about the tools of others before the battle has even begun, I suggest you lower your voice and prepare yourself." The silence that followed was absolute. 10 months ago, a response like that would have been impossible. But Jin Sakai had commanded armies. He had stared down Koten Khan. A rigid schoolboy with a loud voice was nothing. The boy with glasses flushed a deep red. He bowed stiffly. I apologize for my assumption." He sat down quickly. President Mike cleared his throat, clearly thrown off by the intense exchange. Right. As examinee Midoriya correctly stated, approved support gear is allowed. Now, let's talk about the 0-pointer. Izuku tuned out the rest. He understood the parameters. He had 10 minutes to inflict maximum structural damage on heavily armored targets while avoiding a massive, unkillable obstacle. It is no different than raiding a Mongol war camp, Izuku thought, his thumb lightly brushing the hilt of his Bakken. Strike hard. Fade away. Survive. Test Center B. Massive, monolithic steel doors towered over the examinees. The mock city behind the walls looked impossibly large, a labyrinth of concrete, glass, and shadows. Izuku stood at the very front of the crowd, mere inches from the doors. The other students were stretching, hyperventilating, or trying to hype themselves up. Izuku was perfectly still. He closed his eyes, controlling his heart rate. Inhale for 4. Hold for 2. Exhale for 6. He let his senses bleed into the environment. He felt the subtle vibrations in the ground, the heavy machinery idling behind the walls. He smelled the ozone and hydraulic fluid, and then, he felt the guiding wind. It blew against his back, pushing him forward, directly toward the center of the mock city. Start! Present Mick's voice blared over the loudspeakers. The other students hesitated. They looked around, waiting for a countdown, waiting for permission. Izuku did not wait. The instant the first syllable left the speakers, Izuku's muscles coiled like high-tension springs. He launched himself forward. He didn't run like a track star. He ran like a shinobi, his torso leaning forward, his arms pumping in tight, controlled arcs, his footfalls completely silent. He crossed the threshold of the gates a full 3 seconds before anyone else even realized the exam had begun. What are you waiting for? Present Mike screamed from the tower. There are no countdowns in a real battle. That kid in the black gear gets it. Run! Izuku sprinted down the main avenue. The guiding wind pushed him to take a sharp left into a narrower side street. Clank! Whir! From an alleyway, a one-pointer rolled out. It was a bulky, olive-green machine, rolling on heavy treads, its single red optical sensor glaring menacingly. Target acquired, the machine droned mechanically. Izuku didn't break his stride. He didn't draw his sword. As the robot raised its mechanical arm to strike, Izuku accelerated. He slid directly beneath the clumsy, horizontal swing, his knees grazing the asphalt. As he passed under the machine's guard, he drew a kunai from his left thigh. He didn't try to pierce the thick armor plating. The ghost aimed for the joints. With a brutal, upward thrust, Izuku drove the thick steel of the kunai directly into the exposed hydraulic tubing behind the robot's knee joint. He twisted the blade violently and ripped it backward. Hydraulic fluid sprayed like black blood. The robot violently pitched forward, its treads locking up, crashing face first into the pavement. Before it could reboot, Izuku vaulted onto its back. He drove the heel of his boot directly into the red optical sensor on the back of its head, shattering the glass and destroying the motherboard beneath it. 1 point, Izuku whispered. He didn't pause to admire his work. The wind pushed him forward. For the next 6 minutes, the students in Test Center B witnessed the phantom, while students like Bakugo were screaming, creating massive, deafening explosions that reduced robots to slag. Izuku was conducting a silent, terrifying symphony of destruction. He encountered a group of 3 two-pointers guarding a wide intersection. Izuku didn't charge them. He scaled the side of a fire escape, moving vertically with terrifying speed. He perched on the third-story railing. He pulled a smoke bomb from his belt, yanked the wire pin, and dropped it into the center of the robots. Hiss! Boom! A massive cloud of thick, white smoke engulfed the intersection. The robots immediately began to spin, their sensors blinded, firing their blunted projectiles wildly into the fog. Izuku dropped from the fire escape. He landed directly on the shoulders of the centermost robot. He drew the Sakai steel. The heavy ironwood, reinforced with steel plating, hummed in the air. Moon stance. Used to stagger heavily armored brutes, Izuku swung the Bakken in a devastating, spinning downward arc. He didn't aim for the armor. He aimed for the thin, unarmored neck joint connecting the head to the chassis. Crunch. The brutal kinetic force of the heavy wood and steel cleanly decapitated the two-pointer. Izuku leaped off the falling chassis, using it as a springboard to launch himself toward the second robot in the smoke. He shifted his grip mid-air. Water stance. He landed, dodging a wild, blind punch from the machine. He flowed around the strike like a river around a stone, bringing the heavy Bakken up in a series of 5 rapid, fluid strikes. He shattered the left arm joint, cracked the chest sensor, and brought the weapon down on the head, caving it in. The third robot finally locked onto his heat signature through the fading smoke and charged. Izuku sheathed his Bakken. He stood perfectly still, waiting. 5 paces. 3 paces. At the absolute last second, Izuku executed a perfect dodge, sidestepping the machine by a fraction of an inch. As the robot blindly barreled past him, Izuku drew a kunai and jammed it into the main drive belt of the robot's treads. The machine seized, flipped over itself due to its own momentum, and crashed into a concrete wall, sparking and dying. 36 points, Izuku tallied silently. High above the mock cities, in a darkened observation room, the faculty of UA High watched the monitors. We have a promising crop this year, a small, bear mouse creature named Niza hummed, sipping his tea. The explosive boy in Center A is quite destructive. But look at this one in Center B. Niza pressed a button, bringing Izuku's feed to the main screen. The teachers fell silent. They watched the boy in the dark gear. He wasn't using a quirk. There were no flashes of light, no elemental bursts. There was only pure, unadulterated, lethal efficiency. Who is that? The R-rated hero, Midnight asked, leaning forward, her eyes wide. He moves like a seasoned pro. No wasted movements. He's not just destroying the robots, he's dissecting them. Izuku Midoriya, Niza read from a file. Quirkless. Applied under a support item exception. He's using a reinforced wooden sword, throwing knives, and homemade smoke bombs. Quirkless? The blood hero, Vlad King gasped. Impossible. Look at his reaction time. He just dodged a projectile from a 3-pointer from 10 feet away. In the corner of the room, standing in his skeletal form, Toshinori Yagi watched the screen. His hands were gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles were white. You didn't lie, my boy, Toshinori thought, a mixture of awe and terror washing over him. You truly fight like a creature of the shadows. His methodology is highly irregular. The underground hero, Eraserhead, Shota Aizawa, finally spoke. His dark, tired eyes were locked onto Izuku. He isn't fighting like a hero. He's fighting like an assassin. Look at his stances. Look at how he prioritizes joints, sensors, and blind spots. He's not trying to overpower them. He's crippling them. Aizawa leaned closer to the monitor. Look at his eyes. The kid hasn't blinked in 2 minutes. He doesn't have the adrenaline rush of a rookie. He has the heart rate of a veteran who has taken lives. The heavy implication hung in the air. Well, Niza smiled, his eyes glinting. Let us see how our young assassin handles an opponent he cannot assassinate. Niza flipped a large red switch on the console. Rumble. Izuku stopped in his tracks. He was standing in a wide plaza, having just dismantled his 42nd point. The ground beneath his feet began to shake violently. The windows of the surrounding mock buildings shattered, raining glass down on the street. A shadow eclipsed the sun. At the end of the main avenue, the buildings were literally torn apart. Dust and debris exploded into the air as a machine the size of a skyscraper slowly rolled into view. The 0-pointer. It was a monstrosity of steel, gears, and hydraulic menace. Its single, glowing red eye swept the street like a lighthouse of doom. Its massive hands slammed into a building, crushing concrete like papier-mâché. Less than 2 minutes remaining. Present Mick's voice echoed. The street erupted into chaos. Examinees who had been fighting bravely just moments ago broke, screaming in absolute terror, turning and fleeing for the gates. An insurmountable force, Izuku analyzed calmly. It is a siege weapon. A distraction. The objective is to survive. Engaging it yields no tactical advantage. Jin Sakai's pragmatic logic dictated a clear path. Fall back, preserve stamina, and live to fight another day. Izuku turned to join the retreating crowd. I'll help. Please! The voice was faint, barely cutting through the grinding gears of the behemoth. But the guiding wind caught it, and blew it directly into Izuku's ear. Izuku stopped. He turned his head. Through the thick cloud of settling dust, he saw her. The girl he had caught at the entrance. Achiko Uraraka. She was trapped. A massive chunk of debris from a shattered building had pinned her right leg. She was struggling frantically, her hands pressing against the concrete, but she was exhausted, unable to lift it. The zero-pointer's massive tread was slowly rolling forward. In less than 30 seconds she would be crushed. The other students ran right past her. Izuku's eyes widened. When the innocent are threatened, a samurai does not calculate the odds. He draws his sword. The memories of Clan Sakai, the honor he had cast aside, flared brilliantly in his chest. He was the ghost, yes. He was pragmatic. But he had forsaken his honor to save people, not to abandon them. The guiding wind howled, practically pushing him forward. Izuku Midoriya did not run away. He sprinted directly toward the mechanical titan. What is he doing? Midnight gasped in the observation room. He can't destroy that thing with a wooden sword. Izuku's mind was racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I cannot damage the chassis. I cannot stop its momentum. I must disable its central nervous system. The neck joint. It is 80 feet in the air. I cannot jump that high. He looked at the environment. The zero-pointer had just smashed a building to his right. Massive chunks of concrete, steel rebar, and glass were still raining down in slow motion from the upper floors. Izuku reached to his belt. He didn't draw a kunai. He drew a custom tool he had spent weeks perfecting, a kunai attached to 40 feet of high-tensile, lightweight polymer wire, coiled around a spring-loaded spool on his belt. The grappling hook. Izuku didn't run to Uraraka. He ran to the wall of the collapsing building. He threw the kunai with blinding speed. It wrapped around an exposed steel I-beam dangling from the 5th floor. Izuku locked the spool, grabbed the wire with both hands, and sprinted up the vertical face of the wall, using his momentum to swing higher. He's scaling the debris. Aizawa shouted, genuine shock breaking through his stoic demeanor. Izuku reached the I-beam, detached his hook, and looked up. The zero-pointer's head was sweeping left to right, searching for targets. I need a blade, Izuku realized. Wood will not cut hydraulic steel. He looked down. Embedded in the concrete balcony next to him was a jagged, 3-foot shard of heavy, sharpened armor plating, blown off one of the 3-pointers the Titan had crushed. Izuku ripped the jagged metal from the concrete. He held the raw steel in his left hand, and drew his reinforced Bakken in his right. He crossed the two weapons in front of him, creating an improvised pair of dual blades. He looked at the zero-pointer. It had spotted him. A massive, metallic hand was sweeping through the air, attempting to swat him off the balcony like a fly. Izuku took a deep breath. The dance of wrath. No. That was for closing horizontal distance. The heavenly strike. A mythic technique. An unblockable, lightning-fast draw that channeled every single ounce of the user's kinetic energy into one focused point of absolute destruction. Izuku leapt. He didn't jump away from the hand. He jumped onto it. As the massive metal hand swung toward him, Izuku landed perfectly on the knuckles. He didn't stop. He used the upward momentum of the robot's own swing to launch himself higher, soaring directly toward the machine's exposed neck. Time seemed to slow down. In the observation room, Toshinori Yagi stopped breathing. Izuku hung in the air, 80 feet above the ground. The wind roared around him. Lightning did not crackle from his body, nor did energy glow in his veins. But the sheer aura of lethal, concentrated intent radiating from the boy was so intense it almost distorted the air around him. Izuku crossed the jagged metal shard and his steel-reinforced Bakken. He channeled every muscle fiber, every ounce of torque in his hips, his shoulders, his core. Shurden Sun! Heavenly strike! Izuku spun like a drill in midair. He struck the neck joint. He used the raw, jagged metal shard as the cutting edge, and brought the heavy, bone-crushing weight of his Bakken down directly on top of it, hammering the metal deep into the machinery like a chisel. The sheer, pinpoint kinetic force shattered the reinforced casing. The jagged metal severed the main hydraulic artery and sliced clean through the central command wires linking the head to the chassis. Kaboom! A massive explosion of blue electricity and pressurized air erupted from the neck. Izuku didn't stick around to watch. He kicked off the sparking chassis, entering a controlled freefall. Below him, the massive red eye of the zero-pointer flickered and died. The hydraulic pressure failed. The Titan's head slumped forward, dead weight, pulling the rest of the chassis off balance. The machine let out a horrific, grinding groan, before tilting backward and crashing to the earth with the force of a localized earthquake, far away from Uraraka. The dust cloud was immense, swallowing the street entirely. "Time's up!" President Mike screamed. Silence fell over Test Center B. Uraraka lay on the ground coughing, her eyes wide with shock. She had watched the entire thing. She had seen the boy in black soar into the sky, strike the beast with the fury of a demon, and sever its head. Through the settling dust, a figure approached. Izuku walked out of the smoke. His dark green tunic was torn, and blood was trickling down a shallow cut on his cheek. His breathing was heavy, his muscles burning from the impossible strain of the heavenly strike. He walked up to Uraraka. He didn't ask if she was okay. He knelt down, assessed the rubble pinning her leg, and wedged his heavy steel bakken under the concrete as a lever. With a grunt of exertion, he heaved. The concrete shifted just enough. "Pull your leg out," Izuku commanded, his voice tight. Uraraka scrambled backward, freeing her trapped limb. She looked up at him, tears of relief and awe welling in her eyes. You saved me." "Thank you?" "Thank you so much." Izuku looked down at her. The cold, lethal edge in his eyes softened, just for a moment, revealing the gentle soul of Izuku Midoriya beneath the armor of the ghost. "A warrior does not leave his allies behind," Izuku said softly. Well, what a mess." A small, elderly woman walked through the crowd of stunned, silent students. "Recovery girl." She handed out gummy bears and began healing the wounded. Izuku watched her approach. He knew her quirk accelerated natural healing using the patient's stamina. He had very little stamina left. Before Recovery Girl could reach him, Izuku turned away. He sheathed his bakken, secured his empty smoke bomb pouches, and adjusted his mask. "Wait! Where are you going?" Uraraka called out, reaching a hand toward him. "You're hurt." "I have survived worse," Izuku replied, not looking back. He walked away, his dark silhouette cutting through the settling dust of the battlefield, leaving a trail of utterly dismantled machines in his wake. High above, in the observation room, Aizawa smiled, a terrifying, predatory grin. "Mizu," Aizawa said, his eyes never leaving Izuku's retreating form. "I don't care what his written test scores are. That kid is in my class.